is actually in Elden Ring. Back then, it was a flask of healing, but now it's used as a smoke bomb by the vulgar militia. Yeah, so this was probably never meant to be noticed by players, but Elden Ring's vulgar militia are actually throwing little Estus flasks. Of course, there's no official connection between the two here. But
it's like the Elden Ring studios telling Dark Soul, fuck you with the Estus flask as a secret Easter egg insult.
the model used is undeniably the same model as the classic flask of previous games, as confirmed by Senuo Tante and Great Mighty Pio on Twitter, even if the textures involved are slightly different. If you didn't know, the word Estus likely comes from the Latin aestus, meaning heat. It's quite fitting for a vessel that literally stores the heat of bonfires in liquid form. Sometimes it feels
That's actually pretty dark, which is called Dark Soul.
like an age since I actually delved into Dark Souls lore in any depth, and if you're someone who misses those days, well, I've got a bit of a surprise for you. So, I've just finished narrating over 400 pages of Dark Souls lore from a book called Abyssal Archive, which is on sale now. And you can listen to it in audiobook form if you head to the link in the description. Abyssal Archive is another product from the talented team over at Tune and Fairweather, who created Soul Arts for me last year. These are gorgeous books, housed in a noble blue slipcase and bound in faux Hellkite Drake leather, and they just radiate quality. The physical version of Abyssal Archive does command quite a price too.
I can't tell if this is a sponsor or not for this video, but I'm sold.
Admittedly, but that makes sense when you realize that what you're getting is also years of lore analysis done by Loki, who is one of the best writers of Souls lore that I've ever met. And there's a third book that actually comes with your purchase too. I've never seen anything like this before, but it's a thinner book that folds out into this incredible, expansive world map of Lordran, illustrated in the style of Elden Ring's own map, which is just such a genius idea. I love it. Dark Souls has such an intertwined world, and these pages show that off like nothing else. So, if you're interested in having Dark Souls lore in book form, check the link in the description and go and purchase my audiobook or pick up a physical copy. Speaking of picking things up, Elden Ring added an item rarity system to items found around the world, which allows you to easily distinguish between minor items, regular items, arteria leaves, and lastly, legendary items.
I did notice that when I was playing the game. When I saw the very last highest rarity, I was like, oh yeah, baby, you're mine. I'ma grab it without hesitation.
But what if there was
But always check for trap. Be aware of your surrounding. Whether you play Dark Souls or Elden Ring, be careful. It might be a trap.
fifth rarity? Well, recently, Twitter user Chain Failure discovered this cut-dropped item effect, a reddish-orange glow that extends really high into the space above it, meaning it'd be pretty hard for a player to miss any item with this glow. Now, items with this effect obviously don't appear anywhere in-game now, but
That sucks.
that raises the question, if this effect had been left in-game, what item would this glow have been used to represent? Personally, I think this effect might be related to the Elden Ring and the Greater Will. For
Hey, it might be in the DLC.
one, the runic symbols above it look a little bit like those on the cipher weapons, which represent the Greater Will's language of light. And if you look closely, as Chain Failure does in their post, you can see little crystallized shards floating around it as well, the same crystallized shards that appear around sites of grace. Finally, as consumable runes grow in power, they seem to take on this orange glow, which is a similar glow to
Quick advice, if you received any forms of rune, and if you want to get a secret weapon, do not absorb the rune to gain XP to become stronger. There are a bunch of YouTube videos where you can farm and how to get runes, but don't swallow it. Don't ever fucking swallow it. Unless you're in Journey 5 or 6 and you got all the exclusive items.
this cut effect. So if I had to guess, I think this special effect might have once been used to represent a great rune. At one point, perhaps, great runes were something that you picked up in the overworld. But maybe From Software pivoted away from that eventually and made these physical representations of them instead, because that would explain why this effect isn't in the game. But what do you guys think? I can't think of many other items worthy of such an aura, especially since that aura seems linked to the Elden Ring and its shattering. But maybe I'm wrong, and this represents something else important. A legendary arterial leaf, perhaps. One could only dream. For number 4, many of Elden Ring's weapons are, of course, inspired by equivalents out in the real world, but one you might not have expected to be real is this, the Urumi, a weapon that traces...
Dude, when I found this weapon, I was like, there is no way you can bend that sword and then bend it back into the circle. There is just absolutely no way, and guess what? They did.
Its origins back to the Indian Iron Age. While Elden Ring's Urumi is a whip made out of the liquid metal of a silver tear, the Indian Urumi is made out of flexible-edged steel, measuring 3/4 to 1 inch in width. A Sri Lankan variation has even been discovered with up to 32 blades attached. Allegedly, this weapon was supposed to be handled like a flail, and while the light blades made it much lighter than a flail, the Urumi required the wielder to be extremely dexterous and control momentum with each swing, with techniques including many spins and agile maneuvers. Records show that these long-reaching spins made the weapon particularly well suited to fighting against multiple opponents, though I'd wager that the wielder was a danger to themselves as well with this weapon. It
looks like a circus master with a lion.
Invention, nonetheless. Speaking of inventions, did you know that Elden Ring supposedly has its own genius inventor? And while their identity is supposed to be a bit of a mystery, I think we can safely guess who it is. So the pulley bow and pulley crossbow read as follows. This weapon utilizes a series of pulleys and strings. The complex mechanism, which required advanced mathematical and mechanical understanding to craft, was likely made by a certain genius who learned Golden Order fundamentalism. So that narrows it down, as few characters we know could be classified.
And meanwhile, in Dark Souls, you got the great bow to shoot the dragon. No math, just a big bow and 1 string.
As genius practitioners of Golden Order fundamentalism. Radagon would probably qualify, and Goldmask would too, especially considering his mathematical genius in Golden Order fundamentalism. But there's another candidate, Miquella, and I personally believe Miquella is the genius in question who crafted the pulley weapons, because Miquella wasn't just proficient in Golden Order fundamentalism, he was also noted in other areas of the lore as an expert craftsman. Gowry calls him a true artisan for his creation of the Gold Needle. The Valkyrie's prosthesis Miquella created for his sister is also regarded as a masterwork of craftsmanship. And now we have the pulley weapons, which themselves have a golden hue that is found in all of Miquella's crafted items. Carrying this logic further, I'm realizing that it's also now possible that Torrent's spectral steed finger whistle too might have been created by Miquella. It's described as a delicate goldwork ring. It's visually striking, and it doubles as a finger whistle, which is pretty genius. We also recently speculated that Miquella might be the owner of Torrent in my video on...
The biggest thing that Elden Ring has done, that Dark Souls should have done, is to create a steed. For example, when you go to a big map where there's a little white area, in Dark Souls, you need to have a horse. But I understand there are certain environment with specific weather, like the mucky swamp or the wintry snowland from DLC, your character kind of struggled to walk through. I understand there was a steed in Dark Souls, but if somehow Dark Souls create a steed or to allow the hero to be more mobile, like to jump and attack, that would be cool. But yeah, I just had to mention that elephant in the room real quick.
Elden Ring's upcoming expansion, and I reckon the fine craftsmanship of this ring might validate that theory a little bit further. Looking back, it's amazing how present Miquella has been in the story all along, without him physically appearing yet at all. Miquella's character is far more fulfilled in the cut content of the game, where he has dialogue, items, weapons, and more. I'll personally be looking out for a lot of this cut content to return in Shadow of the Erd Tree, and he's not the only cut character I'll be looking out for, because a lot of minor characters fascinate me as well. One cut minor character is called Estelle, and she was apparently once an alchemist devoted to study of the Erd Tree. As the story goes, she witnessed the discovery of the cracked crystal tear.
I feel like the story is going to lead to the tragedy of Dark Plagueis the Wise, if you're a Star Wars fan.
Which is that tear you can put into your flask of wondrous physic with explosive results. While she did note that this was a failed experiment, Estelle believed that this crystal tear had spawned a new, dangerous school of thought, and the cut item description states that she was utterly enchanted by it. This is a cool description, and I'm sad that it was lost. Props to Sekiro Dubi, who translated and restored this description from the Brazilian-Portuguese closed network test files. So, Estelle is a French name, derived from the Latin stella, meaning star, and when it comes to From Software's games, it's always a good idea to look at the etymology of names to see if there isn't a little more information we can glean. For example, when it comes to Miquella, Miquel is an Old English adjective embodying an abundance or great magnitude of something, which...
Give me one word, and I'll give you the Greek root for it.
Ties in nicely to cut content regarding Miquella's relation to an age of abundance, to contrast his sister's affliction of rot and decay. The name Miquella also appears to be a version of the name Mikel, which in turn is borrowed from Hebrew Mikael, meaning who is like God, perhaps alluding to Miquella's relationship to Marika and Radigan, or his status as an Empyrean, a candidate for godhood. While it's important to treat these discoveries with a healthy degree of skepticism, if you look at From Software's long history of creating characters, it's clear that they do take etymology into account sometimes. For more examples, go and check out Luajuk's Twitter thread on the etymology of other names and characters, linked in the description, because there's a lot more that I haven't yet mentioned. Another interesting etymological twist that I recently discovered is the Cathedral of Manus Celis, perched atop the plateau of the Moonlight Altar in Leonia. Longtime fans might recognize the name Manus, associating it with the monster whose gigantic hand pulls you into the past in the DLC of the first Dark Souls. And it's that hand that both the monster and the cathedral inherit their name from. Manus is the Latin term for hand, and Celis is a word meaning something related to the heavens. Thus, the Cathedral of Manus Celis could conceivably also be known as the Cathedral of the Heavenly Hand, alluding to the position of the two fingers that lurk below it. While Ranni's two fingers end up forever entombed in their cave below the cathedral, there exists another burial site of interest, a stone's throw away in Leonia. Recently, Twitter user Ashen highlighted to me that an illusory wall past the entrance of the Raya Lucaria Academy reveals a set of 7 sarcophagi that look suspiciously similar to the ones contained within the wandering mausoleums scattered throughout the lands between. Perhaps the 7 tombs represent the founders of the 7 conspectus that form teachings in the academy, as there are 7 crowns that represent each branch, so it's not unreasonable to assume that these tombs would be prepared in the academy, though it's worth noting that the witch Selen still seems to be alive and well. Though
it's kind of amazing when you think there's an entire game in front of you, and you just go out there to explore the world and look at every single detail. Just imagine all the time that you're using to analyze little detail by detail, location by location, room by room. That is some serious dedication right there to find Easter eggs, lores, and secret.
She's certainly jumped out of her past body at least once in the past. While the Conspectus founders may have been glorified and memorialized close to their home, there's another character who may not have received such a ceremonious burial. Close to the base of the Erd Tree in Lanedale is this, a single grave with some rather curious loot in front of it, 3 smoldering butterflies. It's odd that they've been deposited here as an item, instead of as a swarm of butterflies, as they usually are, right? Well, this line of thought led Reddit user ThisNameTaken to posit that this grave may be dedicated to Melina, given the smouldering butterflies and its out-of-the-way position. This theory builds off my own theory regarding the children of Marika and Radagon. A while back, I suggested that each butterfly item in the game was linked to each child of Marika and Radagon. The eternally young nascent butterfly for Mikola, the rotten Aeonian butterfly for Melania, and the smouldering butterfly for Melina, who is known as the Kindling Maiden. So, of course, I personally love the idea that this could be Melina's grave, set near to the base of the Erd Tree, where she was born to commemorate her loss of body, perhaps. But at the same time, it's still just that, a theory, nowhere near being fact, no matter how much I'd like it to be.
Who knew that someone would be talking about Butterfly and see the potential lore behind it? It all comes down to the butterfly, and there are so many theories behind it, or potential facts. Butterflies, man. We are talking about butterflies. This is how people love Elden Ring so much, and then want to squeeze out every single secret juice in this game. Respect.
Number 11. So, when you explore an instance of Elden Ring's world, there is about a 0.5% chance that any lesser enemy will spawn with the golden eye effect, and a 1% chance for more imposing enemies. But did you know that this effect can also appear on enemies that don't have eyes? At any rate, it can appear on enemies that don't have conventionally placed eyes. Take the jellyfish, for example. Despite not having any obvious eyes, the golden glow can still appear on 4 spots around their body. I wonder, are there any other eyeless enemies that this effect appears on? Number 12. So when you usually use a weapon skill without the required stat, or FP, the skill will often still perform, just without as much damage or special effects. So in the case of the Envoy...
You know what's funny? The very first Dark Souls game I played was Dark Souls 3, and holy shit, I couldn't even fucking play the game. I died like 100 times in 1 hour. But once I beat the Abyssal Watcher, and I got the Great Baron sword, where you have a dagger and a gray sword, and you execute special move, you swirl in the circle, you launch into the air, and you swing your sword down. That's how I beat Dark Souls 3. But over time, looking back at it, it's kind of embarrassing for me. Just learn how to use special execution and not learn how to dodge or roll or block. That's my big take. For me, it's,
Boy horns. From Software couldn't still have them shoot bubbles. That wouldn't make sense with no FP or the faith for the weapon. So what's funny is that their solution was this, a pathetic hollow air sound instead. Number 13. So it's been long known that Miyazaki is a big fan of tabletop games and the worlds they're in. For example, an old Rolling Stone interview conducted near the release of Dark Souls 3 notes that Miyazaki has a copy of
It's the same thing in Dark Souls 3, where you have the sword and you cause a wind magic to fight the giant Cinder Lord.
Sorcery in his personal library. This gamebook, published in 1983, takes the reader on an adventure through its world as either a warrior or a wizard. And it's clear that Miyazaki, or at least the design team on Elden Ring, was inspired by this book on some level when designing their most recent title. The smoking gun is this, a character called the Sightmaster Sergeant, who bears an uncanny resemblance to Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing. Not only is the eye symbolism shared by the two extremely relevant, but he's actually standing in the exact same, very unique pose that Gideon Ofnir is in when he confronts you towards the end of the game. I always thought Gideon's arrogant pose here was pretty ridiculous, to the point where I was wondering what the team was trying to convey when they designed him in this pose. So it's actually pretty satisfying to realize that it was a reference to Gideon's origins all along. Since Gideon was clearly inspired by sorcery, I believe that the Flame of Frenzy was likely inspired by the book as well. In a previous version of Elden Ring, Kale was known as the Red Eyes Merchant, and the Flame of Frenzy was known instead as the Curse of Red Eyes.
When you see the red eye in Elden Ring, do not look and run fast as you can run like hell. But if you dare to pursue it, let's just say there are consequences and reward.
Well, in sorcery, there are those known as the Red Eyes of Kare, who, when they open their eyelids, are able to burn everything they see. The story goes on to explain that these eyes of these creatures continually emit beams of searing heat, burning anything they look upon. It probably goes without saying that, yeah, the red eyes of sorcery and the red eyes of Elden Ring sound extremely similar. This next secret comes to us from Loki, the author of Abyssal Archive, which I showed off earlier. Again, please check out that book after this video is done, if you're interested. In this book, Loki has a section where he talks about how Seath, the Scaleless Dragon, was embraced by royalty.
I remember.
That's how Dark Souls puts it, but the phrase, embraced by royalty, doesn't actually give us the full picture. To understand properly, we need to understand what the original Japanese version of Dark Souls says about Seath, and the cultural context of the words they used here. The Japanese text for Seath uses the term gaiseki, which refers specifically to family of the king's mother, consort, or princess. In other words, the Japanese text makes it clear that Seath married into Anor Londo royalty through a woman of Gwyn's kin for...
Remember this lady? This is the safest room that you can be in Dark Soul and feel good at the same time.
or political benefit. Something that would have been more obvious to a Japanese Dark Souls player, but not to its English-speaking audience. Gaiseki actually shows up again in Elden Ring as well, when used to describe Rani, Rykard, and Radahn becoming demigods, when their father Radagon married into Marika's family. Interestingly, while the word Gaiseki has historically been used to refer to marrying into a male king or emperor's family, the kanji isn't inherently gendered, so Elden Ring is able to gender flip this term to apply to the relatives of Queen Marika instead. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and again, please check out Abyssal Archive in the links below if you want to hear me go on about Dark Souls lore for hours on end. Or check out the physical book if you want to enshrine Dark Souls' lore for yourself. But other than that, thanks again, and I'll see you again very soon.